Hello, YouTubers. This is Jordan Howell here, and today marked the final broadcast of CITV in the UK on ITV2, sadly, and well, yeah, it's a bit devastating, actually, but yeah, so yeah, sad day for all of us, but it's actually the final time on ITV2, and yeah, I don't really. I knew it was coming. This ITV2 block wouldn't have lasted completely. Like, it's all everything's on the internet, whilst the CBBC is actually still has its TV channel along with CBBS. Well, without Horrid Henry, they wouldn't have survived that the brand entirely. So but yeah, in this sad devastating state, we're going to be talking about my sort of, depending on the runtime, my long history with CITV, and the entirety of everything. The TV, we're going to talk about everything. The block on ITV1, which was the first time I actually accompanied CITV. The short little bit about GMTV Kids, which was related to CITV, and the TV, my discovery, my understanding about what happened in 2006, about the launch of the CITV channel in 2006, and right up to the sad, near enough death of the programming block. And yeah, so yeah, it'll be my discovery with CITV all began with the when we first moved around here, and mostly we couldn't me and my family couldn't really afford, unless it was my dad, which we sadly left. Me and my mum's and my older brother sadly left. um if you were him, you probably would have had a lot of money and worked. You probably could afford like Sky, NTL, Telewest during like the 2000s. Um, and at the time, Freeview was in its early stages. Um, well, we still, based in about the year 2001, we still like ITV Digital, and or On Digital as it was previously called, that horrible competitor to to Sky, and which you needed one of those weird digital aerials just to receive it. Otherwise, if you would use one of your old aerials, it would have glitched out and everything. Um, yeah. My my family still stuck with the old fashioned way of TV. The four basic channels, being BBC One, BBC Two, ITV1, and Channel 4. Um, Over in my area, there would have been also five terrestrial TV channels if we were able to receive Channel 5 and watched Milkshake on in the early mornings. Watch like JJ the Jet Plane, Bear in the Big Blue House, Book of Pooh, and Barney and Friends. Even though that program, the latter being the latter one being the program that had moved from GMTV. um, which I'll talk about a little bit of GMTV. But yeah, it was a weird, and I was about 3 years old. CBBC was well, still in the time of using those yellow background idents. CBBS wasn't even a thing till about the following year. And as for CITV, they had that. My discovery of it was mostly having the program, that weird preschool programming block, which probably people don't, people most mainstream people won't recognize. It's called Teletots, and that showed many of the programs that many of CITV's preschool shows. I think the the headline show that would have been on every single day of the week was Mop Top Shop, the Jim Henson production. Of course, if you know that production company, it was the ones that during the late 90s, early 2000s did programs like Bear and the Big Blue House and Channel 4's The Hoobs. And yeah, that was their main headline show, and then after that they would have like a choice between each day of the week another program on the afternoon, like either like shows like Dream Street or Kipper, Maisie, um, Dog and Duck. Anyone probably remember Dog and Duck? Weird program, I know. Um, and various others like others you probably haven't heard, others that you may understand recognize from your childhood. Otherwise, some you probably for long forgotten. But yeah, I used to watch that, and then I had a choice between watching the few hours of watching the repeated early morning episode of the Tweenies that would have been on BBC Two, or probably watching CITV and their slots. But and yeah, great great programs back in like that time. And at that time, at the moment, my childhood was raised in front of that, unfortunately. Yeah, which raised in front of that. And no, there were other things. I had various VHS tapes of many of shows that were probably on during my older brother's time, when my older brother was a kid, because mum never wanted me to show any of the little kids programs she used to watch. Which fortunate to parents would be a cinch of, you know, horror, kind of that horrible um that weird feeling that that most people but yeah there was not really much choice if you were a really lower class person like me who had various VHS tapes come from the various charity shops, or, or very much anything like yeah, you would have had no thingy with anything. But I was also had, and CITV was very familiar to many people because in my family, because there was a couple of people during the time, even my, like, specifically, yeah. So the person who my family that also could recognize CITV was my older brother, because he used to watch like was Adora, Rosie and Jim, Tots TV, um, Budgie the Little Helicopter showed probably was a show created by the Sarah Ferguson, also known as the Duchess of York. Budgie was. While originally the other two, Rosie and Jim and Tots TV, were produced by the producers of the Teletubbies, Ragdoll Productions, which Teletubbies was on CBBC, in like on the BBC Two slot, which would be on before the Tweenies, and yeah, so there was always a familiarity with CITV in my family. But yeah, most the shows were really like the shows. Even when I was a kid, they were still really well written shows. And then later in 2002 was the introduction shows like during that time, Angelina Ballerina, NG Benji, Merlin the Magical Puppy, and Thomas the Tank Engine actually came back onto CITV in 2003, with repeats of Series 6, after a year after they aired on Nick Jr. But so yeah, it was all good. And then and then there was a and then round so yeah. Now and there was also another programming block on early Saturday and Sunday mornings, which was also on the ITV network under its under its early morning franchisee of the ITV network, known as GMTV, and they had a short little hour-long programming block in the early hours of the morning called GMTV Kids, and the programs that they showed on there was sort of in the same high popularity as something on probably CITV fame, like Bananas in Pajamas, but like I said, like the aforementioned Barney and Friends, the and before it left in 2002, the Jellykins, Fun Song Factory, yeah, there were huge amount of programs. And he had some that also like probably no one's heard of, like Rockabye Bubble or The Big Garage, um and hell even the Wiggles actually weren't as that popular in the late 90s until they were moved over to Nick Jr. in the 2000s. And most of the programs, one of the most headline series was a really show that no one has probably heard of, Nini's Treehouse. The program produced by the American distributor of Teletubbies, Itsy Bitsy Entertainment, and looking back at that show now, it's very American program that was a co-production, British American co-production, and yeah, you can never. And then later on again, but one of the shows that were, but then in the year of 2003, the producers of the Teletubbies and Rosie and Jim and Tots TV, and even of course Brum, Anne Wood, under a Ragdoll Productions company, started making a little show that would be airing on semi-cast on both CITV and GMTV Kids, called Boo Bar. Program about these five weird horribly affected penises that were like technicolored. Like they look like they're like literally who in the mind wanted to design character. Look up on Boobar and you can honestly think those things look like affected penises. those those five things. You could tell that their heads are knobs, the penis, and they really look, and really they every time they come up close to the screen like that on the screen. It was all it really and it's really brain dead, but it and you can tell that like it was really like you can tell that the producers the people just wanted to repeat the success of the Teletubbies, and they would also do it again on CBeebies Within the Night Garden on the bedtime hour. And even though that show reran a whole long time, and even today you could still have your sightings on In the Night Garden on the bedtime hour on the CBeebies still on the, at the time you just end the channel and along with the but yeah they but yeah they, who in the mind of CITV wanted to commission that weird program? Like I wouldn't. I would put like quality, but that was the time. My childhood was no different to the current generation, but it was also at the time, but it was sort of also half of the generation before. In the way they still well written the TV, they've really written TV shows quite well in like the 2000s, and they. But still, it was all bright. But still, in my childhood, it was brilliant writing and bright visual colors on the screen. That was the 2000s, the last generation of well-written kid shows, but the first generation of children's programming that was very, very pandering, disgusting, colorful puke. But yet again, it was good puke. It was good, tasteful puke. We ate it up. We actually we like some shows like the most Teletubbies pre Peppa Pig era of kids TV. Well, Peppa Pig came out probably around 2004, but yet again, it wasn't as popular as it was until like the 2010s. And that was on channel. Like I said, I think that was on Channel 5 and Nick Jr., but not on CITV. But all was fine. But then originally, the CITV also had some, like with CBBC, a few American imports, which, and a few of them were actually quite good. The first time I actually watched a few of them, mostly they were all taken from like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, and some of it was fine. Like some of it was fine. Some of the Nickelodeon shows, even though I was too young to watch them, they still reran like shows like Hey Arnold and The Angry Beavers. But mostly they had. But there was one program during the time when I was 5 years old or 4 years old, near enough scared me to death, and it's the show that I've done a VHS and DVD collection of, two-parter actually, and since then since the time I was old enough to watch it, I actually I started understanding the show, and I was fine with it. I was a huge fan of it, and that was when I would start watching at my dad's place, and that was of course SpongeBob SquarePants, the program that's the most iconic Nickelodeon character to ever be graceful. It was weird. It was still new. It was still new in my life. SpongeBob was, even though, and during that time I was a bit big. I was a big fan of one of Nickelodeon's early phenomenons, being the Rugrats, um, which originally was, of course, a show about babies, and they talked when their parents weren't even near them. Well, except for Angelica, she was originally she was like a 3-year-old that talked to both the grown-ups and the babies. Um, and even the which was kind of a weird program, but it was quite good show. But then when some of the tapes were advertising a show about this weird piece, which I thought was, but then when I watched CITV, I started seeing this an weirdly shortened, edited intro of this piece of cheese just coming together in like 4 chunks and morphing, and then these kids were just screaming like his name along with this pirate, like kind of like protestingly and angrily. That was the first time I actually heard the SpongeBob theme song. Was the short last few lyrics of the theme song, and I was not in for a good time until later on when I started watching the full intro on the time of like 7 or 8 years old on Nickelodeon and Nicktoons. Well, I started actually understanding the program, and the theme song wasn't too bad actually. Later, it was just like later on, you know. I didn't know at the time that the show was set underwater. I didn't. I thought Patrick Star looked like a bloody disgusting giant piece of pink bubble gum. Oh, what next? Oh, what next? If you probably guessed that reference, I referenced the SpongeBob episode "Something Smells." But yeah, SpongeBob was a show that scared, weirdly at the young age, scared the flipping fucking bejeebus out of me. Like, literally. But the and it wasn't until I watched it completely on Nickelodeon and Nicktoons where I started understanding the show and becoming a huge fan. But like I have to keep mentioning a lot, because but there was also one episode that really really made me stop watching the program. I was a teenage Gary, in which originally SpongeBob goes out jellyfishing, and because he hasn't got much time with, and he's got to do that with Patrick, of course. He tries to ask Squidward refuses, but then when SpongeBob says he's going to be away, he soon changes his mind. And whilst that happens, Squidward does a horrible job looking after Gary, and he of course, when SpongeBob returns, he sees Gary sick, and then the vet tells him to put this weird thing called snail plasma onto him. And soon enough, Squidward accidentally injects into SpongeBob's nose, and Squidward tells him it'll be fine. But then the most frightening thing was that was that weird snail transformation of SpongeBob because of that plasma that happened. And Gary, and also later on, during the middle portion, when SpongeBob already had this snail plasma injected into him, Gary starts actually. It turns out all Gary needed was just a drink out of his bowl, and but then originally, yeah, SpongeBob starts turning into a snail later on during the night, and then originally he scares the freaking fuck out of Squidward, like tormenting him, meowing, and everything. And then later during the near end of the episode, Squidward gets the snail plasma on his nose, and he turns into a lemon snail as well. And they start meowing to the song "Blow the Man Down," on the brick wall in the end of the episode. All three of them, Gary, SpongeBob, and Squidward. Um, but yeah, that episode really freaking scared the hell out of me as a child, and I soon stepped away from CITV and basically started going into more CBBC. At that and going back to watching BBC Two in the afternoons. But it was that, hot. But then there was also a show that didn't. I was a huge fan of CITV during the time of Five, and there was also Mr. Bean the animated series, which was a British cartoon, by the way, and I loved it. And my mum was also aware there was a live action Mr. Bean, but she didn't really. She hated the live action Mr. Bean because it was Graham Atkinson in real life was acting like as Mr. Bean in the same character that he does the voice in the cartoon. Also played the character in live action in this old 90s program. I've got the whole box set on DVD actually, and I'll show you. Yep, this, and that was this Mr. Bean right here was the one I was introduced to on CITV, and it was played more having not much dialogue in it. Even though there were only few spurs of dialogue in the show, it was more comedic. Very, very weird, funny show. But then we fast forward into 2006, and then there was also news that there was, and a promo that I saw on ITV, that CITV was going to have a full-fledged 6-hour TV channel, 12-hour TV channel. I was blessed, and it was going to be on Freeview. It was going to be on Freeview, which was what was going to come out on at first, and then later on channels like NTL and Sky and Telly West would get it later on. And the CITV channel was. And also, I was growing up at the time. GMTV Kids did also have a block called Digging It as well. If you probably don't know, that showed a lot of, after the preschool programmings were finished at 7 a.m. From 7 till 9:25 was Digging It, or mostly some people commonly call it Dig It, and it showed a lot of Disney, and it was the only way I can watch all the Disney animated shows. Kim Possible, Lilo and Stitch the series, Timon and Pumbaa, the original Fox Kids 1994 series of Spider-Man, and it had everything on there. And then later on in 2005 it was replaced with, because CITV channel was coming out and Disney wanted to also allow the Disney channels to be widely available in March of 2006, with the exception of Toon Disney. As soon as that would stay premium and be renamed to Disney Cinemagic around the same day as when the Disney Channel and Playhouse Disney came out, and on free to everyone who had the kids TV packages. The block was replaced with another block on during the same hours called Toonatic, and Toonatic was my childhood during my preteen years. Like the whole concept of two genders of kids actually competing with one another. Then originally, and it still had some of the same shows that were kept from Disney, but also added a few Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network programs on there, just to add more variety. And because of that whole thing, and it was actually quite good if you didn't have any of the channels like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, or Disney Channel. It was a great Saturday and Sunday morning programming block that was on during the GMTV hours, and then and that was the only thing. And then the CITV channel came out. Me and my parents didn't have Freeview just yet, but then originally in 2007, my mum wanted to get Freeview. By the time when CITV stopped its afternoon slots on ITV1, and originally, it had the Disney and CITV channel had mostly every CITV program from the late 90s, early 2000s up to the present day at that time. And but one of the programs that came out was produced by the same people who produced the Thimbles, based on a series of children's books from Francesca Simon, called Horrid Henry, in October 2006. I was a huge fan of that, even though I don't really like the program nowadays, because it's very, very much for that audience. I used to really be a huge fan of it, and then there were also weird other shows. But by the time, yeah, it was the best thing. I could even remember hour-long marathon on Bank Holiday Monday, called Totally Henry in 2008, and that had like every episode of series 1 of Horrid Henry on there, and I missed out on it. And that's when I also got I also had got the a DVD which I don't have anymore of this show, called Horrid Henry's Horrid Revenge. Like, I had a slightly small collection of Horrid Henry DVDs during that time. Most of them were bought from places like most of them were bought from Asda, during my mum's food shopping. And yeah, great times. And then there was also other programs: Super Normal, Almost Naked Animals, Fleabag Monkey Face, and this all leading on to like the late 2009 up to like the 2010s. Mr. Bean the animated series came back in 2014. CITV also in the 5th to 6th of January 2013, they celebrated their 30th anniversary with a marathon called our Old School Weekend, which was like every CITV program from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, except with some of them that was still making new episodes. Of course, Horrid Henry was still making new episodes, so that didn't show up on the block. Mr. Bean the animated series wasn't on there because that was on still airing on, that was at the time on Boomerang, until it later returned in 2014 when it was revealed it had a new series coming out. So yeah, and then this brings us up to the time in 2020 where I started, or 2018, where I started doing my first rant video on any of the kids channels, and CITV was the worst one. Like, they had the shitty CGI reboot of I didn't really care about at the time, which was Thunderbirds Are Go, which was shitty CGI version of the Thunderbirds. Like, they were still putting out imported programs, mostly from Warner Brothers, various Canadian imported shows that were very obscure programs. Like, no one probably remembers like shows like Nerds or Monsters or anything like, or any other shows. I just mentioned Looped as well. And then during the time of the pandemic, I completely stopped watching kids TV. when I first got Disney Plus, and Netflix, and that was it. And then later on, it comes to the 2020s. The CITV channel closed down in 2013. No, 2023, sorry. And then now and moved over to ITV2 because of ITVX Kids. And then now it's completely gone. That ITV2 block is completely gone. So yeah, that was it. That was so far. That was my full history. I've explained enough for about 35 minutes or 36 approximately. So yeah, that was my history with CITV. My personal history with it. And it's sad to see a childhood icon of a channel completely go. So I hope you see you guys soon. So this is Jordan Howell signing out.